Welcome back to Mr. Rosenbaum's classroom. I'm Mr. R, your math teacher, probably or not. Either way, let's learn some math. In this lesson, I will be introducing how to group terms and other things you need to know before you can factor a polynomial. If you'd like to follow along, I've created fill-in-the-blank notes in a Google Doc. They are in the description. You can print them out, or you can just make a copy of them for yourselves. Let's quickly go over what you need to be familiar with before we start this lesson. You will need to be innately familiar with your multiplication tables because we will be finding the greatest common factor. If you forgot about what is greatest common factor, I'll be giving you a refresher in a minute. The last thing is a reminder that x squared is simply just x times x. This will be very important when it comes to grouping with polynomials. But first, let's review multiplying polynomials. Last lesson, we talked about multiplying polynomials, but factoring polynomials will just be the opposite, basically. Let's quickly review a multiplication problem with polynomials. X plus 1 times x plus 2. First, we need to FOIL and distribute like we did in our last video, multiplying with polynomials. And after all those steps, feel free to pause and look at them. And our final answer for this problem will be x squared plus 3x plus 2. Now, factoring is merely the opposite of multiplying. We can take our original answer and using grouping and factoring, we can get our starting problem. But in order to factor, you need to know how to do grouping. The next video we will go into more in depth over actually factoring polynomials, but in this video we'll be mainly focusing on grouping because you need to understand that before you really start factoring polynomials. But the most important thing to understand before grouping is the greatest common factor. What is greatest common factor? Well, the definition of greatest common factor is the biggest number that two terms can be divided by. Let's just start with an example. We have 6 and 9. What is their greatest common factor? What can both of these numbers be divided by? Evenly, of course. And this is really why I need to be so familiar with the multiplication table. So you can just look at it and know it. Because that's the easiest rather than having to do a lot of guesswork in the calculator, doing a bunch of division, and so on. So, what is the greatest common factor between 6 and 9? Well, our answer is 3. In our next example, we have 3x squared and 2x. This is important. There are two parts to these terms, the number part and the variable part. So we have 3 and 2. Can either of these be divided by any number besides 1? Can both these, 3 and 2 will only both, the only common factor really is 1. So we can't really group them per se. However, we also have x and x squared. These do have a common factor. And that common factor is x. Because as I said before, remember, x squared is simply x multiplied by x. So we can easily factor on x. So now you try. Okay, so what is the greatest common factor of 10 and 15? What is the biggest number that they can both be divided by? I'll give you a moment to figure it out. I'll wait. Well, did you figure it out? Did you try? Oh, very good. The answer is 5. That is the greatest common factor. It's 5. So then we move on to our next question. We have 2x squared and 4x. Again, what is their greatest common factor? Can you figure it out? Okay, so their greatest common factor will be 2x. Notice how we can factor out both a number and an x, since both terms can be divided by 2 evenly, and both terms have an x in them. Now, let's work through a problem where we group or start factoring out numbers. We have 2x squared plus 6x. First, we need to figure out what is the greatest common factor between 2x squared and 6x. Well, the greatest common factor would be 2x. So then we need to divide or pull out 2x from both. 2x squared divided by 2x, well, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and x squared divided by x will give us x itself, since x squared, again, is x multiplied by x. So we're left with 1x, or just x, because usually you don't use the term 1x, you just use x by itself. The 1 is just implied. Since we don't have a number in front of it, we just assume there's just 1. So now 6x squared divided by 2x, well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and x divided by x is 1. We combine those two together, and we get x plus 3. So we're going to put x plus 3 inside the parentheses, and then we're going to put our greatest common factor, 2x, on the outside of the parentheses. These two parts can be multiplied by each other. They are multiplied by each other. When you see numbers next to each other in parentheses without a plus or a minus, that always means that they're multiplied by each other. And if you wanted to, you could multiply them out and get what we started off with. So now let's work together on a few grouping problems. Let's start with 3x plus 6. What can 3x and 6 both be divided by? Yes, they both can be divided by 3. We can divide, and then we get 3 times x plus 2. And if we multiply them back together, like we could do in the last lesson, we'd get our original question. 3x plus 6, because they are basically the same thing, just written in different ways. Okay, so our next problem is 2x squared minus 8x. Again, what is the greatest common factor between these two numbers? Is it 2? Good guess, but no, try again. What about x? Still not correct. I'll give you a moment to think about what is the greatest thing we could factor out of it. Okay, so if you thought the greatest thing we could factor out of it was 2x, then you are right. Remember that both numbers and variables can be factored out together, and many times they will be. So 2x squared minus 8x, factoring out 2x, well, x squared divided by 2x, that would be just x by itself, because x squared divided by x just gives us x, and 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So next we move over to the 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then the x's just cancel each other out. X divided by x is 1, or it just basically cancels out. You don't got to worry about it. So next, we come to a list of problems. And basically, I want you to try to solve all these problems. So all these problems are on the notes given in the description. and I want to see if you can get the correct answers. It's honestly good practice. So I will be showing you the answers soon, but I advise you to solve them before I just flash the answers so that you know how to do this. So I hope this was helpful, and you can pause this video if you need some extra time on the questions, as you probably, because I don't expect you to solve them in like a couple of seconds. So if you have any questions or comments, you can post them in the comments. If you have suggestions for future videos, something you want me to go over or need better help on, just write it in the comments description. And I'll be showing, and here are the answers basically to the questions. So I hope to see you next time as we explore math.